So President Trump sitting down with Laura Trump today for an interview that will air on her weekend show, My View, on Saturday. And it comes on the cusp of what could be, perhaps, a breakthrough in these talks with Iran. And we are just months out from the midterm elections. Watch.
You have consistently been willing to do the hard things, the things that your predecessor said should have been done, but they didn't have the guts to do them.
So you have really a very small window. So if you wanted to play that game, then you would wait till the midterms are over, and then the following hour, you'll attack Iran because they cannot have a nuclear weapon. Most people agree with me on that. But then it gets maybe carried into, the next election, whether it's a midterm or not. So you have a very short window for doing anything having to do with war. But I don't view that window. I view it, I have to do what's right.
So with that, let's bring in Democrat Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. He serves on the Foreign Relations, Judiciary, and Appropriations Committees. Senator Coons, good to have you here. It is, if you look at it...
Good to be on with you again.
Thank you for joining me. When you look at it from the broad spectrum here, we have been dealing with this menace in Iran. Proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, attacks in Israel, all of this for 47 years, and their march towards a nuclear weapon. And it is true that no prior president has had really the guts to try to change that in a forceful way. So, what do you think about that? What do you think about the risk that this president has taken, given that there is a political risk attached to it as well?
Well, Martha, let's talk about where I agree with what you just said and disagree. I agree that the mullahs, the Ayatollah in Iran, have been a threat to the region and to global security for decades. And their attacks on American troops, remember the Khobar Towers attack, their support for our enemies in Afghanistan and Iraq, have cost the lives of hundreds, if not thousands, of Americans.
That's
and
correct.
Their attacks through their proxies on Israel and the United States make them one of the world's leading sponsors of state terrorism and a nation that we have persistently opposed. We were able, under President Obama, to mobilize a global effort to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon, to impose very tough sanctions on them. And President Obama secured searching inspections of their nuclear enrichment program and a halt to their efforts to get a nuclear bomb. President Trump has taken a different approach. He tore up that deal. He's been aggressive. Yes, he took strikes that took out the head of the IRGC, Qasem Soleimani, in his first term. And last summer in Operation Midnight Hammer, he bombed Isfahan, one of the major sites for Iranian enrichment. The challenge is where we are today and where we go forward. There's still about 900 pounds of highly enriched uranium buried somewhere in Iran. We don't know exactly where it is, and we don't have a path forward towards an inspection regime that will allow us to know what's happened to it and be certain that they're not renewing enrichment.
And that was the
Today,
problem.
the Strait of Hormuz is closed.
Correct. That was the problem in the Obama administration, that we had no anywhere, anytime inspections and no curbing on the ballistic missile program, which is such a threat to people who are close by. And you rightly point out that they have been at war with us for many, many years. They have killed between 600 and 1,000 U.S. soldiers, not to mention all of the civilians in the region. So we know that they're trying to work towards a deal to get the strait back open. We'll see where this goes. I know there are some who hope that it leads to complete regime change at some point, with the people rising up in Iran to take back their own future. We'll see where that goes. I do want to ask you about this video, this interview that Joe Biden did, since you obviously very close to the Bidens, from Delaware as well, very involved in the campaign yourself. Here's what she had to say. Let's go back first and watch that moment from the debate, which you commented on right afterwards as troublesome. Watch this.
With the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare, the total initiative relative to what we're going to do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
Joe, you did such a great
great job. You answered every question. You knew all the facts.
What happened? I don't know what happened. I mean, as I watched it, I thought, oh my God, he's having a stroke. And it scared me to death.
She thought he was having a stroke. It's inexplicable
Martha,
as a wife
look,
why you wouldn't stop the whole thing right then and go straight to a hospital. What's your take on what she's saying now?
Frankly, my take is that as I've gone up and down the state of Delaware in the last couple of days, nobody's asked me about Joe Biden's debate performance in 2024. They've asked me about the rising price of gas. They've asked me about Trump's tariffs. They've asked me about insecurity and instability because of an unresolved war in Iran that is not going well. As someone who cares for President Biden, I too was concerned about what that several-second pause meant, what was happening at the moment. But I was with President Biden earlier today. We were at the funeral of a friend of ours, someone who long served as the mayor of Wilmington, and he's fine. I see regular incidents where President Trump falls asleep in meetings in the middle of the day, makes no sense in answering questions. And frankly, what I think the average Delawarean wants to hear is what are we going to do to lower their costs? And what are we going to do to avoid future pointless wars overseas? Two things President Trump ran on when he was successfully elected in 2024.
Well, I mean, we can go back and forth, you know, on the cognitive abilities of President Trump versus what was quite obvious from President Biden. President Trump answers like 30 to 100 questions every single day from the press. Most days, he is
Martha,
a completely.
we
never saw President Biden take that risk in a million years of answering questions that way. Yeah, no, I think it is significant because I think there was a lot of cover-up, frankly, of his condition, and I think that you probably were part of that.
What's the goal of the war in Iran? And if the goal of the war in Iran is to prevent Iran from ever having a nuclear weapon, Secretary Hegseth couldn't explain that strategy, and he couldn't explain how the war in Iran is going to help make us more secure and lower the costs that Americans are facing because of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. That's what's in front of them. That's where we started in this interview,
deal with the
and that's what I think we ought to be focusing on.
We have to deal with the threats that exist out there. We understand the path that Iran was on. We saw no action taken really under the Biden administration to stop it from happening in a meaningful way. So, you know, it is important how presidents function, the current president, the last president. It is very important because it's the leadership of the country.
And Martha, one of the things I have raised over and over in hearings on the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee is the very real risk to the United States from Iranian drones. They are successfully attacking our bases, our embassies, and our allies. And President Trump should be embracing the one country that knows how to intercept their drones successfully, Ukraine. If we work more closely with Ukraine and purchase from them the systems that can defend our country, we would all be better off.
That's a valid point. They have advanced drone technology dramatically and have changed the trajectory of war as we know it, based on what we've seen there. So it's a good point. Thank you very much, Senator. Always good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.